The morning sky above New Harmony Colony turned black as massive alien ships, each one bigger than a city block. Hung in the air like dark metal clouds, the peaceful research outpost had become a nightmare in less than an hour. Dr. Emily Watson ran through the corridors of the main research building, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe behind her. The sound of explosions grew louder and closer. The aliens weren't just attacking, they were destroying everything they could. Emily burst into the communications room, where other colonists were frantically trying to send messages to anyone who might listen. Her hands shook as she grabbed the emergency transmitter outside the window. She could see the colony's protective energy shields flickering like a dying light bulb. They wouldn't last much longer. "This is New Harmony Colony," she said into the microphone, her voice cracking with fear. "We are under attack by unknown hostiles. Any ship, any fleet in the area. Please help us. We have over 3,000 people here, families, children, elderly people, who can't defend themselves." The words felt hollow as they left her mouth. New Harmony was at the edge of known space, weeks away from the nearest military outpost. Who would even hear their call for help? And even if someone did, who would risk their lives for a bunch of scientists and researchers they'd never met? Miles above the colony, Commander Vex stood on the bridge of his massive warship, watching the human settlement burn through his viewing screen. The Raylan Empire had conquered dozens of worlds. Just like this one, it was almost boring how easy it had become. His communication officer, a younger Raylan with bright green scales, turned toward him with obvious excitement. "Commander, we're picking up distress signals from the surface. The mammals are calling for help." Vex's reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smile among his kind. His scales were darker than most Raylans, marked with the scars of many battles. He had earned his position through violence and cunning. Just like every other commander in the Empire, primitive mammals begging for rescue, he said with a low hiss that made his bridge crew laugh. "How pathetic. Scan the surrounding star systems, make sure no one is foolish enough to answer their call." His tactical officer checked the long-range sensors and shook his head. "Nothing. Commander, this sector is empty. The nearest human military base is over 30 light-years away. Even if they received the signal, it would take them weeks to get here." Vex nodded with satisfaction. The humans on New Harmony were completely alone. Just like all the other species the Raylan Empire had crushed over the past century. Some fought back briefly before surrendering, others tried to negotiate or beg for mercy. A few attempted to run, though their ships were always too slow and too weak to escape, but none had ever called for help and actually received it. The galaxy had learned long ago that challenging the Raylan Empire meant death down on the surface. Emily held her sick daughter close as another explosion shook the building. Little Katie was crying, asking why the bad ships were hurting their home. Emily didn't know what to tell her. The emergency beacon continued broadcasting their plea into empty space. Other colonists crowded around, hoping against hope that someone, somewhere, might hear them and care enough to help. Dr. Rodriguez, the head of the research station, placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "Keep transmitting," he said quietly. "Someone has to be listening." But as the alien bombardment grew stronger and their shields grew weaker, Emily wondered if their voices were just disappearing into the cold darkness of space. Unheard and unanswered, the Raylan ships moved closer to the colony, preparing for the final assault that would wipe New Harmony off the map forever. The distress signal from New Harmony reached the Earth Defense Fleet command ship 3 hours after Emily Watson first pressed that emergency beacon. Admiral Jack Morrison was reviewing patrol reports in his quarters when the communication alert chimed through the ship's speakers. Morrison had spent 40 years in the fleet, working his way up from a young pilot to the commander of humanity's most advanced battle group. His face showed every year of those 4 decades. Deep lines around his eyes from squinting at star charts, gray streaks in his hair from the stress of keeping Earth's colonies safe, and scars on his hands from the early days when space combat meant getting up close and personal with hostile aliens. The moment he heard Emily's voice crackling through the static, something cold settled in his chest. He'd heard distress calls before, But there was something about this one that hit him differently. Maybe it was the way her voice broke when she mentioned children. Maybe it was the desperation that came through. Despite the interference from Deep Space Bridge, "This is Morrison," he called over the intercom. "I need all senior staff in the war room immediately, within minutes." His top officers gathered around the holographic display table. Captain Lisa Hayes, his second in command, pulled up the location data from the signal. Her face went pale as she realized how far outside human territory New Harmony was located. "Sir," she said carefully, "this colony is way beyond our patrol zone command protocols. State that we need authorization from Earth Defense Headquarters before engaging in any military action outside designated space." Morrison stared at the tactical display, showing the estimated position of the Raylan fleet. 200 ships against a defenseless research colony. His jaw tightened as he thought about those families. Emily had mentioned kids who probably spent their days studying alien plants and learning about the wonders of the universe, now hiding in shelters while death rained down from the sky. How long would it take to get authorization from command? He asked. Lieutenant Mike Torres, their communications officer, checked his console. At least 18 hours for the message to reach Earth. "Sir, maybe another 6 hours for them to review and respond. That's assuming they approve the mission at all. And how long do you think those colonists have?" The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew the answer. The Raylan Empire didn't take prisoners. They didn't negotiate. They conquered, enslaved, or destroyed. New Harmony would be a smoking crater long before any official authorization came through. Morrison walked over to the main viewing screen, staring out at the stars somewhere out there. Thousands of innocent people were about to die simply because they were in the wrong place when monsters decided to expand their territory. "Torres, pull up everything we have on the Raylan Empire," he ordered. The young lieutenant's fingers flew across his console, bringing up files that made the room's atmosphere even more tense. Images of destroyed worlds, reports of entire populations wiped out, intelligence estimates of Raylan military strength. "They've hit 12 star systems in the past year alone," Torres reported. "Every species they've encountered either surrenders immediately or gets completely destroyed. Their tactics are simple, overwhelming force. No mercy. No survivors who might cause trouble later. Any of those species fight back effectively?" Morrison asked. "No, sir. Most barely had space travel. The few that did have military forces were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. The Raylans have never faced serious organized resistance." Morrison nodded slowly, a dangerous gleam appearing in his eyes. The Raylan Empire had built their reputation on being the biggest bullies in this part of the galaxy. They were used to picking on civilizations that couldn't fight back properly, but they'd never met humans before. "All ships, battle stations," Morrison announced over the fleet-wide communication system. "Prepare for immediate hyperspace jump. Full combat loadout. We're going to show these Raylan bastards what happens when they threaten innocent people." Captain Hayes stepped forward, concern written across her face. "Sir, we'll be in violation of standing orders. Command could court-martial the entire crew." Morrison turned to face his officers, and they saw something in his expression that made them understand why he'd been chosen to lead humanity's elite battle fleet. "Let them," he said quietly. "Some things are more important than following rules." The fabric of space itself seemed to tear open at the edge of the New Harmony system. What emerged from those rippling holes in reality looked unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. 28 ships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it down on the surface of New Harmony. Dr. Emily Watson pressed her face against the reinforced window of the emergency shelter. Through the smoke and chaos, she could see new lights in the sky, not the harsh red glow of Raylan weapons, but something different, something that gave her the first spark of hope she'd felt in hours. "Are those more enemy ships?" whispered Dr. Rodriguez, holding his injured arm against his chest. Emily shook her head, watching as the mysterious vessels spread out in what looked like a protective screen around the planet. "I don't think so. Look at how they're moving. They're positioning themselves between us and the attackers." Commander Vex stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the sensor readings with growing confusion. His tactical officer was running scan after scan, but the results made no sense. These new ships didn't match any known design in the Raylan database. What kind of vessels are those? Vex demanded, his scaled hands gripping the command rail tightly. Where did they come from? His communications officer looked up from his console with obvious bewilderment. Sir, they appeared out of nowhere. Our long-range sensors detected nothing until they were already here. It's like they folded space itself to travel. The ships were unlike anything Vex had seen in his decades of conquest, where Raylan vessels were bulky and intimidating. Covered in spikes and armor plating, these newcomers were sleek and predatory. Their angular hulls seemed to shift and flow, making it hard to focus on their exact shape. They moved through space with an organic grace that reminded him uncomfortably of hunting beasts. Suddenly, every communication channel on every Raylan ship crackled to life with an unfamiliar voice. The translator system struggled to process the alien language, creating an odd delay between words. This is Admiral Morrison of the Terran fleet, the voice said, cold and precise. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system immediately, or you will face the consequences of your actions. Vex laughed out loud, the sound echoing across his bridge. His officers joined in, their hissing chuckles filling the command center. In all his years of conquest, no one had ever dared to give him an ultimatum. The sheer audacity was almost refreshing. Terran, he said, making sure his response was broadcast on all frequencies so these newcomers could hear him clearly. Never heard of your pathetic species before. Mammal, do you see the size of my fleet? Over 200 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. What could 28 primitive vessels possibly do against such overwhelming force? The response came back immediately, without even a pause for consideration. Numbers won't save you when you're in the wrong. 29 seconds. Vex's amusement turned to irritation. These humans, if that's what they called themselves, were either incredibly brave or completely insane. Either way, they would learn the same lesson every other species had learned when they challenged the Raylan Empire. Sir, his weapons officer reported, should we target the human ships first, or continue bombardment of the colony? Vex considered the question for a moment. The smart tactical move would be to finish destroying the colony quickly, then deal with these mysterious newcomers. But something about their arrogant tone made him want to crush them personally. All ships, attack formation, he ordered. Let's show these mammals what happens when insects try to threaten dragons. The Raylan fleet began to turn, their massive hulls rotating with the slow, deliberate menace of predators preparing to strike. Vex had used this same maneuver hundreds of times before. The sight of his overwhelming firepower turning toward them usually made enemy commanders lose their nerve and try to flee, but the human ships didn't move. They held their positions like they were daring the Raylans to make the first move. 10 seconds. Came the cold voice from the lead human vessel. Vex snarled and raised his hand to give the final attack order. Confident that this would be just another easy victory for the Raylan Empire, he had no idea he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The first Raylan plasma bolts lit up the darkness of space like deadly fireworks. Commander Vex expected to see the human ships scatter and panic, or try to retreat to safer distance. Instead, something happened that made his blood run cold. Human vessels moved as one living creature. They didn't just dodge the incoming fire, they flowed around it like water, each ship knowing exactly where the others would be without any visible communication. It was like watching a school of fish react to a predator. But these fish had teeth. Morrison stood calmly on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display as his fleet executed maneuvers they'd practiced for years. All units, implement pattern 7. Show them what coordinated warfare looks like. Captain Hayes couldn't help but smile as she watched the Raylan formation fall apart in real time. Sir, they're firing at where we were, not where we're going to be. Their targeting systems can't keep up with our movement patterns. The human ships split into smaller groups, each one working together like the fingers of a giant hand. When one vessel drew enemy fire, two others would appear from different angles to hit the distracted Raylan ship. When the aliens tried to concentrate their firepower on a single target, that ship would disappear behind its teammates, while return fire came from unexpected directions. Weapons Officer Dave Kim monitored the damage reports flowing in from across the battle zone. Enemy shields are dropping fast. Sir, their armor is thick, but they're not used to taking hits from multiple angles at the same time. The Rallans had built their military doctrine around simple, overwhelming force: send more ships than the enemy, fire more weapons, win through sheer numbers. But the humans were fighting like nothing they'd ever encountered before. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Stone led her fighter squadron in a dance of death through the Raylan battle line. Her pilots moved like they shared a single mind, weaving between the massive alien ships and striking at weak points with surgical precision. Stone to Fleet Command, she reported over the radio, her voice steady, despite pulling 8 times Earth gravity in her turns. These lizards fight like a bunch of individuals, no teamwork, no unit tactics. Every ship is trying to be the hero. Instead of working together, her fighters darted between the Raylan vessels like angry wasps, too small and fast for the big guns to track effectively. But when 20 human fighters concentrated their fire on a single target, even massive Raylan cruisers began to buckle and burn. Commander Vex watched his tactical display with growing horror. His fleet outnumbered the humans 7-1, but somehow he was losing ships at an alarming rate every time his commanders tried to focus fire on a single human vessel. 3 others would appear to support it. How are they coordinating so perfectly? He screamed at his communications officer. Are you detecting command frequencies? Battle coordination signals? The young Raylan shook his head frantically. Nothing, sir. It's like they're reading each other's minds. They're not even using radio communications for tactical commands. Another explosion rocked the flagship as 3 human destroyers hit it simultaneously from different angles. Sparks flew from overloaded systems, and Vex could smell smoke from damaged circuits. Impossible, he roared, watching as his formation continued to dissolve under the human assault. How can so few vessels be tearing apart my entire fleet? The answer was something the Raylan Empire had never encountered before. They'd conquered species that fought as individuals, civilizations that relied on technology alone, and cultures that valued honor over effectiveness. But they'd never faced an enemy that combined advanced technology with pack hunting. Instincts refined over millions of years of evolution. Admiral Morrison's voice cut through the battle chatter on the human frequency. All ships, target the flagship. Time to cut the head off this snake. The human fleet converged on Vex's command ship like wolves, surrounding wounded prey. The Raylan flagship was massive and heavily armored, but it had never been designed to take concentrated fire from all directions at once. Shields failing, screamed Vex's tactical officer, as warning lights bathed the bridge in red hull breaches on decks 7-12. Vex stared at the main display as the human admiral's ship, the Retribution, lined up for a final killing shot. The massive railguns on its forward hull began to glow with deadly energy. Sir, we need to abandon ship, his first officer shouted over the sound of groaning metal and failing systems. But it was too late. The Retribution's main guns fired with the force of a small star, and Commander Vex's flagship split apart like an egg, spilling atmosphere and debris into the cold vacuum of space. The Raylan Empire had just learned that sometimes the hunters become the hunted. The surviving Raylan ships scattered like leaves in a hurricane, their commanders too terrified to even attempt regrouping. Those that could still move jumped to hyperspace without looking back, abandoning their dead and wounded to the cold vacuum. In less than 2 hours, the mighty Raylan armada had been reduced to burning wreckage and fleeing cowards. Admiral Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the tactical display as the last enemy contacts disappeared from sensors. The silence that followed the battle felt strange after all the chaos and violence. His communications officer was already picking up dozens of distress signals from damaged Raylan vessels. But Morrison had more important concerns. All medical ships proceed to New Harmony immediately. He ordered search and rescue teams. Prepare for emergency deployment. I want every wounded colonist found and treated down on the planet's surface. Dr. Emily Watson crawled out of the emergency shelter on shaking legs. The air still smelled of smoke and burned electronics. But the terrible sound of alien weapons had finally stopped above them. Sleek human shuttles were already descending through the atmosphere, their landing lights cutting through the haze like beacons of hope. Emily held her daughter close. As the first rescue teams arrived, the human soldiers who emerged from the shuttles moved with calm efficiency, immediately setting up medical stations and organizing evacuation procedures for the most seriously injured colonists. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" asked a young medic, kneeling beside Emily and her daughter. "We've got full medical facilities on our ships. We can treat anyone who needs help." Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face, not from pain, but from overwhelming relief. After hours of certain death, strangers from across the galaxy had risked their lives to save people they'd never met. Admiral Morrison arrived on the surface within an hour, touring the damaged research facilities and speaking personally with the colonists. Emily approached him as he examined the crater where the main laboratory used to stand. "Admiral," she said, her voice still shaky from everything they'd been through, "I need to ask you something. Why did you come? We're not part of your territory. We're not even your people. Your government didn't order this rescue mission, did they?" Morrison turned to face her, and Emily was surprised to see how tired he looked. The stress of commanding a fleet in battle had aged him. Years in just a few hours, but his eyes were kind when he looked at her and her daughter. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "anyone calling for help is our people. Doesn't matter what star system you're from, or what species you belong to. When innocent folks are in danger, that becomes our business." Emily wiped her eyes and managed a smile. "Thank you, all of you. We owe you our lives." "No debt," Morrison replied. "Just promise me you'll do the same for someone else if you ever get the chance." Word of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. The quantum communication networks that connected civilizations carried the story to every inhabited system within days. In spaceports and trading stations, merchants and travelers gathered around holographic displays, watching recordings of the fight with amazement and disbelief. On the water world of Aquia, a group of traders sat in stunned silence as they watched human ships tear through the Raylan formation. 200 ships, whispered Captain Nex, a veteran smuggler who'd seen his share of space battles. The Raylons had 200 ships, and these humans destroyed them. With less than 30, similar conversations were happening across the galaxy. The Raylan Empire had built their reputation on being unstoppable conquerors. Every species in known space had heard stories of their overwhelming military might, but now those stories were being replaced by new ones, tales of mysterious humans who appeared from nowhere to protect the innocent. The Galactic Council, a loose alliance of the major spacefaring civilizations, called emergency sessions on their home world of Nexus. Prime Ambassador Krell of the Zentari Federation studied the battle recordings for the 100th time, trying to understand what he was seeing. "These humans don't fight like any species we've encountered before," he told the assembled delegates. "Most civilizations fight to conquer territory or resources. Some fight for honor or revenge, but these humans, they fight to protect people they've never met. They risk their lives for strangers." The recordings showed human ships taking damage while shielding the colony, pilots flying dangerous rescue missions to save wounded Raylons. Even after the battle was over, it was behavior that didn't make sense to many of the council members, who were used to more practical motivations for warfare back on Earth. Fleet Command received Morrison's detailed report with quiet satisfaction. Humanity had been preparing for first contact with hostile aliens for decades, but they'd never imagined it would happen this way. Instead of defending Earth itself, they'd announced their presence to the galaxy by saving innocent lives. Admiral Chen, Morrison's superior, read the report twice before speaking to her staff. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "we've just changed the balance of power in this part of the galaxy. Every bully and conqueror out there now knows that humanity is watching, And we've made it clear that we don't tolerate threats against innocent people. The stars would indeed never be the same. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, not as conquerors or traitors, but as protectors, and across the galaxy, those who preyed on the weak began to look over their shoulders, wondering if the humans might be watching them, too.